each of these nodes. This is a big deal. Okay, so let's talk about this. So this is a scene graph representation of very simple tree structure. Now, tree structure has a leaf node. On the bottom has a leaf node. Now, leaf node will make up a branch, right? In JavaFX, the syntax, the keyword that represent that group, the branch node is called the group. Okay? So we have a group which is a branch node that contains text and circle graphical objects. So I have text and circle inside this content. Now, this is a group. So this is a branch node that contains these two graphical objects, text and circle. Now, I'm applying a kind of transformation. There are different kinds of transformation, rotate, translate, and things like that. I'm applying translate transformation to this branch node. So translate transformation is I want to move this whole branch 15 pixels on the right and 15 pixels downward. So this is a big deal. I can apply, so this is a good question. What are the 4 things that can be applied to each node of scene graph? Raise your hand, yes. Transformation. Sorry?
Translate one object into another.
Right, so I said in previous slide, I know it's not fair because I showed just once, right? So 4 things you can apply. Effect. Transformation. Animation, good. And transformation, yes. And one more, user input, which I haven't talked about yet. So this is yours. And the gentleman who raised the first time, thanks for your effort, right? This is your. Okay, so moving forward. So let's talk about these 4 things, effects first. So effect is basically one of those 4 properties you can apply to each node of scene graph. Now, every effect class is extension of this JavaFX scene effect and effects base class. Now, there are lots of these effect classes. Example, linear gradient, radial gradient, or drop shadow. Now, each of these subclasses will have its own set of attributes that can be applied to have a different, let's say, graphical representation. So let's talk about drop shadow effect first. So these are the set of attributes drop shadow class has. Example, color, offset X and Y, radius, and things like that. So instead of talking about this attribute here, let's see an example. So I'm defining text object. Now I'm applying drop shadow effect to this text. So this is what you see. So the offset Y is 3 and color is this color. The circle is affected with the drop shadow offset Y is 4. It's basically where you start your drop shadow. Now, if you don't specify other values, default values will be taken. Now, if you want to change those, then you can specify different values. So let's take a look at the next example. So in this case, I like to change the color of the drop shadow effect of this text to green. So you can see there's a green color, right? And the radius is increased to 20. So you can see the radius of this drop shadow is increased to 20 pixels. Here, I'm setting the offset X10, so you can see it moved to the right a bit. and also change radius to 30 pixels so you can see the drop shadow increase in size. And also change the color to blue. Okay, pretty straightforward. So you can apply any kind of effect to any node in singular tree structure. That's so powerful. Now, so we talk about effect, we talk about bind. Now, when you combine these two, it becomes very interesting. So the properties of your graphical object has changed automatically by using bind. So in this case, I have a rectangle object and has a drop shadow effect applied. Now the value of radius is bind to another variable. It could be another variable x or something. It just happens to be the same name, but this is just another variable name. Now, I like to change the value of this radius variable by using another, let's say, slider. So whenever I move my slider left and right, the value of this radius will be changed, and that gets reflected right away to your graphical object. That makes sense? So this is where the bind really becomes interesting. So when it gets applied, the properties of graphical objects, it gets interesting. Okay, so I'm going to show you these things in demos. All these applications are available in javapassion.com, so you can try these things yourself. These are the set of sample applications. You can just open it and run it, and that's what I'm going to do. So I already opened these things. So let me see. So this is the sample application. So if I run this one, so you can see, so this is exactly the same code I showed you. Now let's see this code. This is where the bind. So here, I have a slider object, okay? And the radius of this rectangle is bind to the slider value, okay? So this is similar code I showed to you. So if I run this code, by changing the slider value, you can see the drop shadow, the radius is got changed. Okay, all right. Now let me show you another sample application. By the way, if you go to JavaFX.com, they have a lot of sample applications. Okay? And one of the sample applications is what is called Effects Playground. So this application basically shows you what kind of effect you can apply to graphical objects. So basically glow, just try glow. And this is the same concept. I'm using slider to change the value of something, and then it will change of the glow effect. Color adjustment. Okay. And perspective. So basically this is a sample application. You can see what kind of effects could be possible. Okay. So let me just move on. Interactions. So this is another one of the 4 things you can apply to each graphical node. So by interaction, I'm talking about keyboard or mouse movement. Okay? So in this case, I have an example of rectangle object, and you can have an attribute of on mouse entered and on mouse exit. So basically, I'm changing the value, the color of the rectangle to white or light blue, depending depending on my mouse movement. You can also apply the same thing with the keyboard. Okay? Pretty straightforward concept. So this is a very simple application that you can do some sketch. Oops, excuse me. So let me run this application and then I'm going to show you the code. You can see how simple it is in terms of coding. So you can just draw things. This is my masterpiece. Alright? Okay. So if you see the code, it's very simple. Let me increase the font size. I thought I actually increased the font size, but I guess I didn't. So in this case, whenever I have a mouse is pressed, dragged, and released, basically I'm creating what is called a collection of lines, okay? And then those lines automatically get displayed because it's inside the scene. Okay? So this is it. This is all the code to have the application running. Pretty straightforward, right? Transformation. So transformation basically lets you do these kind of things to again each node of scene graph. Rotation, scaling, and shading is like a skewed like this, and the translation is moving. Okay? So this is how you can apply rotation transformation to rectangle. Basically, rectangle can have a transformed attribute, and then you provide rotate object. So rotate object is, it has its own set of attributes. So I provide angle attribute value. Now take a look at this. I bind with another variable. So whenever I change the value of this variable, this rotation of graphical object automatically happens. And then this is where you want to perform the rotation. This is translate. Translate transformation is basically you provide x and y attributes, and this is where it's going to move its position. Again, you can bind with translate x and translate y. Here, I'm computing translate x and y based on mouse movement. Okay, so by dragging your mouse, it will automatically move this graphical object to different location. Make sense? All right. Moving forward, animation. Animation is very, very important in building VR applications. So language itself, JavaFX language itself has a native support of animation. So it does have even duration class. This is the duration of that animation. You can even use these time literals, like 1 millisecond, 1 second, and things like that. So here I'm assigning 500 milliseconds to a variable called 1.4. Okay, there are two different kinds of animation. One is transition, and the other one is animation. Transition you can think of as a peak-hand animation. So it does something like this: rotate, transition, fade, fading out. So fade transition is basically changing opacity of a graphical object. So every graphical object has opacity attribute, right? And by changing opacity value, it gets faded and it will be faded out in. Okay, so we'll see example of this one later on. Translate transition, path transition. Path transition is basically you can move your graphical object on a path. Okay? And the scale is basically scaling. So let's see how rotate transition animation can be performed. So here we define rotate transition object, and it does have several attributes such as the duration and the node. So